The meeting had been going for 40 minutes. 30 people sat around a long conference table on the 14th floor of Meridian Tech's headquarters in Denver. The room was all glass and polished wood, the kind of space designed to make decisions feel important. Caroline Reyes stood at the head of the table. She was the CEO. 46 years old, 20 years of building Meridian from a 4-person startup into a company with 1,200 employees. She was known for 3 things: her precision, her calm, and the fact that she never lost her composure in front of her team. She was mid-sentence when the door opened. The janitor came in quietly, the way people do when they know they shouldn't be interrupting but the job requires it anyway. He was pushing a small cart. He had come to collect the recycling bin near the door, a task he likely did every Tuesday at this time, probably for years, probably without anyone in the room noticing. Caroline stopped speaking. The room turned. 29 people looked at the janitor, then back at Caroline, waiting for her to continue. But Caroline did not continue. She was looking at the janitor with an expression no one in that room had ever seen on her face before. Her hand, which had been pointing at a slide on the screen, slowly came down to her side. The janitor looked up. He saw her. Something moved across his face too. And then Caroline Reyes, CEO of Meridian Tech, started to cry. His name was Joseph. He was 63 years old, and he had been working the janitorial shift at Meridian's Denver headquarters for 4 years. He came in at 6 in the morning and finished at 2 in the afternoon. He cleaned the lobbies, the restrooms, the break rooms, and the conference floors. He collected recycling on Tuesdays. Joseph was a quiet man. He said good morning to people who said it first, nodded at the security desk, and did his work with the steady attention of someone who had decided long ago that doing a thing properly mattered regardless of whether anyone was watching. Most of the people at Meridian did not know his name. He had a son in Colorado Springs, Marcus, 31, a firefighter. He had a small apartment in the Aurora neighborhood with a garden he maintained in the back with the same careful attention he brought to the office floors. He grew tomatoes and peppers and a rosemary bush that had gotten somewhat out of control. He was not unhappy. He had made a life that worked, built from the pieces available to him after a long and difficult middle chapter that he rarely discussed. What almost no one knew about Joseph was that 22 years ago, he had been a high school science teacher in a small town in western Colorado called Harwick. And one of his students had been a girl named Caroline. Caroline had grown up in Harwick. Her parents had run a hardware store. They were not wealthy, but they were present, the kind of parents who came to every school event and made sure the bills were paid and the house was warm. Her childhood was ordinary in the ways that ordinary childhoods are later recognized as gifts. What set her apart, what had always set her apart, was the way her mind worked. She saw systems. She understood how things connected to each other. In a science class at Harwick High School, when she was 15, she built a model of a water filtration system for a class project that her teacher submitted to the state science competition. She placed second in the state. Her teacher had submitted the project without telling her first. He had seen something in her work that she hadn't fully seen in herself yet. When she asked him why he did it, he said, "Because the world needs to know what you can do. And sometimes someone has to show it to them first." His name was Mr. Aldana. Joseph Aldana. He had taught science at Harwick High School for 17 years. He had the particular gift that the best teachers have, the ability to look at a student and see not just who they were but who they were about to become. He pushed the ones who needed pushing. He stayed late for the ones who needed more time. Caroline had kept in touch with him after high school. Then college had pulled her east, then a job in San Francisco, then the startup, then the years of building something that demanded everything. The contact has faded the way contact fades when life accelerates past you. She had never stopped thinking about him. After she left Harwick, Caroline had tried to find Mr. Aldana twice. The first time was 10 years after graduation, when Meridian was just beginning to find its feet and she had felt the particular impulse that success sometimes triggers, to go back to the people who believed in you before success made it easy to believe. She had called the Harwick School District. She had been told Mr. Aldana no longer worked there. The second time was 5 years later. A mutual acquaintance from Harwick told her that Joseph had gone through some difficult years, a divorce, a move, a period of things not going as planned. They didn't have current contact information. Caroline had thought about hiring someone to find him. She had the resources by then. But something had stopped her, a hesitation she couldn't fully name. A fear, perhaps, of what she might find. Or a fear that too much time had passed and the gap couldn't be crossed. She had carried him in her memory instead. The science classroom with the periodic table on the wall and the model solar system hanging from the ceiling on fishing line. His handwriting on her project submission, neat, careful, the same energy he brought to everything. The day he told her about the state competition. Sometimes someone has to show it to them first. She had built an entire company on that sentence without ever saying so publicly. It was the reason Meridian had a mentorship program. It was the reason she personally reviewed the scholarship applications from underfunded schools every year. Joseph Aldana was the reason for more of who she was than most people knew. And for 4 Tuesdays, without either of them knowing it, he had been collecting the recycling bin outside the 14th floor conference room where she ran her company. The room was very quiet. 30 seconds had passed since Caroline had stopped speaking. In a CEO's meeting, 30 seconds of silence is a very long time. Joseph stood near the door, his cart beside him, looking at Caroline with an expression that was moving through recognition and something beyond it, surprise, yes, but also a kind of careful hope, the expression of someone who is not certain whether they are seeing what they think they are seeing. Caroline crossed the room. She crossed it in a way that parted the silence, not fast, not slow, but with the directness of someone who has made a decision and is not stopping. The 30 people at the table watched without speaking. She stopped in front of Joseph. She looked at him. He was older, of course he was, 22 years was 22 years, but the eyes were the same. The quality of attention was the same. She had spent enough years learning to read people to know. Mr. Aldana, she said. His face completed its journey. Caroline, he said. His voice was quiet. I wasn't sure you'd, he stopped. I looked for you, she said. Twice. I couldn't find you. He nodded once. I moved around for a while. She reached out and took his hand in both of hers. She was crying, fully now, not managed, not performed. The kind of tears that come when something you gave up hoping for arrives anyway. You submitted my project, she said. Without telling me. You would have told me not to, he said. I know, she said. That's why you didn't ask. The meeting was over. Not formally ended, it simply ceased to be the most important thing in the room, and everyone understood that without being told. People began quietly gathering their things. A few of the senior directors exchanged glances. Some of them had worked with Caroline for a decade and had never seen her cry. One of them, David, the CFO, came and quietly told the room they'd reconvene Thursday and ushered people toward the door. Caroline and Joseph sat at the end of the conference table. She had asked someone to bring water and closed the glass door. They sat across from each other with the city of Denver visible through the windows behind them, and Caroline asked him everything she hadn't been able to ask for 22 years. He told her about Harwick, how he had stayed for 3 years after she graduated, then left for a position in Pueblo. The divorce had come in his mid-40s. His son Marcus had grown up in Colorado Springs with his mother, and Joseph had spent too many years driving that stretch of I-25 every other weekend. He had lost the teaching position in Pueblo after the district's budget cuts. He had done other work, warehouse shifts, facility maintenance, a stretch that was harder than he liked to talk about. 4 years ago, he had applied for the janitorial position at Meridian. He'd taken it because the pay was steady and the hours worked with his garden and his bones weren't what they were at 30. He had not known Caroline Reyes was the CEO. He had heard the name, it was a large company, but Caroline was a common enough name that the connection hadn't formed. Until she started speaking at the head of that table and he looked up. "Why didn't you say anything?" Caroline asked. "When you recognized me." Joseph considered this honestly. "You were running a meeting," he said. "I was collecting recycling. It didn't seem like the right moment." "Joseph," Caroline said. "Also," he said, more quietly, "I wasn't sure how you'd feel about it. Finding out the man who was your science teacher is now cleaning your office." Caroline looked at him for a moment. "How do you think I feel about it?" He smiled slightly, the smile she recognized. "I think you feel the way you felt when you placed second at the state science competition. Like something landed where it was supposed to, but not how you expected." She thought about that. "That's accurate," she said. "You were my best student," he said. "In 17 years of teaching. I don't say that to every student. I say it to you because it's true and because you should know." Caroline looked at the table. "I built this company on something you told me," she said. "About showing people what they can do. I never told anyone where that came from." Joseph looked at her with the same expression he had worn when he submitted her project, the quiet certainty of someone who already knew. "I know," he said. "I could tell. From the way the company works." The conversation lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, something had been returned to each of them that they hadn't realized was missing. For Caroline, it was the origin. The reason underneath all the reasons. She had told the story of Meridian 100 times in 100 interviews and had always started with the startup moment, the 4 people, the second mortgage, the first client. She had never told the real beginning. Now she was sitting across from it. For Joseph, it was harder to name. He had spent years in the kind of quiet that comes after a life takes an unexpected shape. He had made peace with it, genuinely, not as a performance of acceptance, but because he was the kind of person who could. He had his son. He had his garden. He had the specific satisfaction of a job done properly. But sitting across from Caroline, he allowed himself to feel something he had set down long ago. The particular pride of a teacher who was right about a student. Not pride in himself exactly, but in the thing he had seen and chosen to believe in. After the meeting, Caroline walked with him to the elevator. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask," he said. "Meridian has a STEM education foundation. We work with underfunded schools. I've been looking for someone to lead the mentorship component, someone who knows what it actually means to teach a student who needs more than a curriculum." Joseph looked at her. "That's a real job," he said. "A real job. Real salary. You'd set your own approach." She paused. "I already know you're qualified." He was quiet for a moment. The elevator arrived. He held the door. "Can I think about it?" he said. "For as long as you need," she said. "But Joseph, I've been trying to give you something back for 22 years. Please let me." He called her office 3 days later. He said yes. The transition took 6 weeks, enough time for Meridian to find his replacement on the janitorial team and for Joseph to finish his last rotation of floors with the same care he had brought to the first. On his last day, he cleaned the 14th floor. He collected the recycling from the conference room. He wiped down the table where he and Caroline had sat and talked for 2 hours. He stood in the room for a moment before moving on. Through the glass walls, he could see the open office below, rows of desks, the movement of a company in full work. 1,200 people, doing something that had started in a high school science classroom in a small town in western Colorado. He was not sentimental about it. He was simply glad. Marcus called that evening. "Dad," he said, "I heard about the job. Are you serious? I'm serious, Joseph said. The CEO of Meridian Tech. You taught her. She was 15, Joseph said. You could already tell. Tell what? That she was going to build something, he said. Some students you can see it in. You just have to make sure you don't let them talk themselves out of it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Is that what you did for her? I submitted a form, Joseph said. She did everything else. The Meridian STEM Mentorship Initiative launched in the spring. Joseph ran it from a small office on the 8th floor. It was a real office, a desk, a chair, a window that got afternoon light. He had put a small rosemary cutting in a pot on the windowsill. It was taking root. The program partnered with 14 schools in the first year. Most of them were in underfunded districts, rural Colorado, Denver's East Side, communities where students had ability that their resources hadn't caught up to yet. Joseph traveled to 4 of them in person in the first semester. He sat in classrooms and talked to teachers and looked at student work. In October, Caroline asked him to speak at Meridian's all-hands meeting. 2,000 employees, some in the room and the rest on screens around the country. He almost said no. You're afraid of public speaking? Caroline said. I'm a science teacher, he said. I'm afraid of public speaking to people who aren't 15. She laughed. Say exactly what you told me in the conference room. About seeing something in a student and not letting them talk themselves out of it. He said it. He stood at the same spot at the head of that conference table where Caroline had been standing when he walked through the door with his cart, and he said it to 2,000 people. Afterward, 3 employees came to him separately. Each one told him about a teacher they hadn't thought about in years. Each one had a version of the same story, someone who had seen something in them before they could see it themselves. He listened to all of them. That evening he drove home to Aurora, watered the garden in the last of the autumn light, and called Marcus. Good day. Marcus asked. Yes, Joseph said. A very good one. The rosemary was overgrown again. He was going to have to do something about that. But not tonight. Tonight he sat on the back step and looked at what he had grown, and was glad, the particular gladness of a man who understands that nothing he ever did was wasted, even the years that had seemed that way. Especially those.